Hey everybody, today I'm talking about my top 10 pleasant surprises, where these are the games where at the time I first played them at least, I wasn't sure what to expect and they were way better than I thought they would be. Sometimes that's because my expectations weren't there, and sometimes it's because I didn't know who the designer was, but I'll explain through each game as we go along. So let's get started at number 10. So at number 10 I have Pyramids. This one's by Matthew Dunstan. This is a game where I completely blind bought the game. I very rarely do that, but I just fancied doing it at the time. And when you do that, I kind of appreciate that I'm taking a punt and the game's probably not going to be very good. It was on sale. But when I got it home and got it played, I was really surprised about how well this one flowed and about some really novel concepts and ideas. So as I said, it's a filler game that only takes about half an hour to play. And you are basically building a pyramid, you're building an obelisk, and you are also trying to build a dungeon of all different types of cards. But to do those things, you are basically drafting a pile of cards depicting different types of bricks on them, different coloured bricks that is. And I think you're collecting sets of 2 at a time, that is. And then depending on your turn order, which is like a draft, where you can either choose to draft a tile that will let you or take the cards first but let you only build in one of those 3 areas, or you can go last and build in all 3. So you've got that tension of being, sure on what cards you're going to get into your supply and be able to use, but only being able to use those things for very particular, or for at least one criteria, or you can say that, I'll take any card going, but at least I can contribute to everything. And then all these different things are going to score in different ways. So for example, the pyramid, you've got like a layer of, I think it's 4 cards, and 3 cards, then 2 cards, and a final pinnacle card, and you're trying to connect all the different colours of bricks together, trying to make as long of a chain as you can for each colour and get points that way. The obelisk, you're trying to get a different colour of brick in every layer that you put down, and for the, I think it's the crypt again, you're trying to get different colours, or be the majority of having each colour in your pile, and you're going to get points that way. I really love that drafting system of going first but being able to do less, or going last and being able to do more. It really did shine through. It scaled well, and it was just a real joy to play. So, naturally my expectations were low for this one, but that only worked in its favour. So that's why Pyramids is at number 10. At number 9, I have Tyrants of the Underdark. Now, this is a game that I would never have even crossed my mind to play, but at a gaming group I was invited to play this one a couple of years ago, and I'm really glad I did, because it's a Dungeons and Dragons themed game, which is something I'm not interested in. And it's a game that mixes deck building with area control, because you're actually using these cards to basically increase your coverage on the board and try and kick other people off spots and trying to kick off neutral pieces in order to control certain areas and get points at the end. Now that's the idea, which is pretty cool in itself. But the game actually had this really cool idea where the more powerful cards you'd get into your hand, as the game kind of neared the end of the game, you could start retiring those cards into this Champions Hall and get points for them, or at least more points for them than you would if you left them in your deck. So there's that extra layer of decision whether, am I going to keep this card in my deck and hopefully it can cycle around one more time before I retire it, or am I just going to say, let's be safe and retire it now for those extra points. That's a really cool concept, and it worked really well. I didn't like the graphic design on this one. It looked a bit bland and a bit plain, but despite that, the game mechanisms really did shine through and the gameplay was really strong. So really impressed by this one, again, because my expectations were low. And I'm in 2 minds about how the Dungeons and Dragons theme worked for this one, because in some ways I can see, it would invite a lot of those, a huge market in terms of the Dungeons and Dragons players. But for me, being a board gamer, I would never have even thought of playing this one because of that skin. So, think of that what you want, really. But nonetheless, it was a really solid game that impressed me. That is Tyrants of the Underdark at number 9. At number 8, I have Runestones. Runestones was a Kickstarter from a couple of years ago by Queen Games. And at the time, I must admit, I didn't know that the game was designed by Rudiger Dawn, who, if I did know that, I probably wouldn't have been surprised, because he makes ultra solid games. This one is another game that kind of uses card drafting and deck building, as you have all these different colours of cards, and you are using them to bring new cards into your hand. You are then combining those cards together and getting rid of the stronger one, I believe, in order to get additional powers. And you can buy these different kind of gems and then buy runestones to give you extra powers. It's really fun, it works extremely well, it plays quickly, it looks nice, it's a great production, and it's just one of those games where I think, you know what, this is just a really well tied together game that's clearly been designed by someone who knows what they're doing. And you know, when I first played it, I thought this is going to be another generic game, and it wasn't. It did stand on its own, and I think it's an underrated title, to be honest. That is Runestones at number 8. At number 7, I have Tumbletown. Now, Tumbletown was a game that came out last year, actually, in 2020, and it's a game where you are drafting cards and taking dice, and then you're rolling those dice, and you've got different colours. You've got colours that, I think your brown ones, which represent wood. You've got your grey ones, which represent stone. You've got your wild dice, and so on. And you are basically using those dice to build buildings. Not only do these buildings require a certain amount of dice, they actually require certain restrictions as well. So they might say every dice in this building needs to be at least a number 4, or they need to be a number 1, 2, 3, and 4, and so on. So you've got all these different ideas that you need to decide on what you're going to commit these dice to in order to build these buildings and get points. But as you acquire more and more of these buildings, they give you lots of interesting mitigation tools to either, you know, re-roll the dice or turn them over to the opposite side, or to convert some dice into other coloured dice. So you've got this real little engine going as well. So I really do like that mitigation. And on top of all that really cool stuff, you've got a player board which has basically a blueprint of your town, and then you are essentially choosing where to put these buildings down as you build them, trying to adhere to certain criteria. So this spot might say, you know, if you get a building that's at least 3 tall, then you are going to get another point. If you've got a black dice here, then you're going to get an extra point, and so on. And I really like that, and it all comes together in a really neat package. Certainly a game that didn't take off as much as I think it should have. But I suppose it's got a bit of breathing space now. It's out on the market, and maybe some good word of mouth can spread about it. But yeah, a game that I thought was going to be a bit unpolished and a bit undercooked, really. But when I actually played it, I couldn't see any fat on this game whatsoever. The production let it down a little bit, I think, in terms of the artwork and graphic design. Maybe didn't make it look as, you know, as professional as it could have done, considering how strong the actual gameplay is. But nonetheless, Tumbletown was a real solid game that just left me massively impressed and a pleasant surprise. At number 6, I have Bumantu. Now, this came out a couple of years ago now. This is an abstract game where you are navigating around this grid of tiles, these acrylic tiles with all different pictures of animals on them. And the animals, or depending on which tile you start on, because you've got your player piece, you are going to move around that grid in certain directions, depending on how that animal moves. And then you're jumping from tile to tile trying to collect these animals for set collection. But on top of all that, which is cool in itself, you have this scoreboard where all the animals score different points. So one might say, you know, if you've got the most monkeys, you get 7 points, and the second place gets 3 points, and so on. But as you take certain coloured tiles, the ones with the black backgrounds, you can actually choose to manipulate that score track by shifting the animal's values up or down spots. And that can be really an interesting level of player interaction as you're collecting a certain amount of animals, and you know your opponent's collecting another one, and you can just keep shifting them around, making your animals more valuable and their animals less valuable. Comes together really nicely, plays in about half an hour again, and a nice production, and yeah, just a welcoming game as well. Really easy to teach. A little bit of variability in there because all the tiles aren't used from game to game. And a game that didn't come out to much fanfare again and just left me impressed. So that is Bumantu at number 6. At number 5, I have Calico. Now, Calico, probably, you know, as I'm recording this, this is an immensely popular game that came out to so much praise last year. And believe it or not, this was actually designed by the same designer as Tumbletown. Kevin Russ, I think he's called. I think he's a brand new designer. Probably a big factor on why I wasn't expecting much from these games. But now he's come out the gate that strongly. I probably wouldn't be as surprised if he brings out another rock solid game. But this one is a game about making a blanket for cats, basically, a bit of a weird theme. But you're doing that by drafting these tiles and placing them onto your board, trying to pattern build, basically, trying to make certain colours and certain patterns on those colours to basically link to certain scoring criteria. So one might say, you know, get 5 points for every row of 4 of this colour, or stuff like that. And the way you've got so many different objectives and so many different restrictions come together. It makes for an extremely tight game with a small margin for error. And I like that. You can't really bite off too much and go for too many of those criteria, because you'll just back yourself into a corner and you just can't do it all. So you have to be quite selective and be a bit flexible as well about how you are going to, or which criteria you're going to go for. And I really like that. It's an extremely tight tile placement game that scales well, really fun, it's quick, great production, and just a game that I think is going to be a bit of an evergreen and stay around for a long time to come. And because I wasn't expecting anything from it, the theme didn't appeal to me, but that game itself is fantastic. That is Calico at number 5. At number 4, I have another game from last year. This is Nidavellir. Now, Nidavellir is a game that's starting to get a bit of momentum now. People are starting to understand it and get it onto their radar. This one is a game where you are basically trying to collect different sets of cards depicted by these dwarves, and they all score in different ways. So some might just say, like, the more of these cards you get more points. Some of them might just score at face value. Some of them kind of multiply how many you have by the number on those cards. So they all score in slightly different ways. But the way you gather these cards is what makes this game interesting, because you have 3 different rows of cards out there on the board, and then you are blindly bidding on taking priority on the card you want on those. But at any time, you always have 2 tokens left that aren't used. And if you ever use your 0 token, which means that you're going to basically go last in drafting a card, then you combine the other 2 that you haven't used together to make a more powerful token to make you stronger in future rounds, so you can get those higher bids in. A great concept, one that it's almost one of those things where you think, how hasn't this been done before? It's so streamlined. It gets to the crux of the fun just from the get-go. Some really interesting powers as well that you can get. And it's just one of those games that I think is going to be a foundation of the board gaming genre for a while to come, because it strikes that weight of being accessible but still having interesting decisions. So look out for this one. It's going to be big. That is Nidavellir at number 4. At number 3, I have a really simple card game called Ohanami. Now, this is a card drafting game where you have a hand of cards, and you're going to take 2 of those cards from that hand and then pass them to your opponent, and it's going to keep going around playing cards down. But basically, this game you have the ability to play on 3 different columns, and as you play on these columns, you are trying to think about what cards are going to score, because you've got your blue cards that score 3 points each from the first round, you've got the green cards that score 4 points each but only from the second round, and then the final round all the cards score. So you've got your grey cards which score I think 7 points, and the pink ones which score in set collection methods. So you've got to be, that pacing is quite interesting, whether you're going to get all the blue cards down early and score them 3 times, or go for those big lump of points at the end. But on top of that, you've got this interesting decision, because every single card is numbered from, I think it's 1 to 120 something. As you play it on these different columns, and you bring new ones into your hand, you can only ever play higher or lower than the cards out there. So the gaps in between cards that you've already played are just a no-go zone. You cannot put cards in there. And that restriction just gets tighter and tighter as the game goes on, meaning that sometimes you just cannot place the cards you want. So you've got to factor in, do I want to score this valuable card and potentially back myself into a corner and basically widen that margin of gap that I can't play towards, or am I going to be a bit safer and keep the margins close so I can have that flexibility to keep playing cards down. A fantastic game, one of the best filler games that I've played in years. That is Ohanami, just a fantastic game that just blew me away. At number 2, I have Raccoon Tycoon. Now, Raccoon Tycoon came out probably a couple of years ago now, and initially, I think probably for the first year or so, I wasn't even interested in going near it. I'd heard some good things about it, but I thought it just looked a bit too light for me. I didn't really know what the game was about. But again, at a gaming club, I was invited to play a game of this one, which I think is a good opportunity to play games that you haven't played before. And I just sat back and just revelled in the fun of this game. It was such a joy to play, so much pleasure, and just a fun experience where you have this fluctuating stock market as you're playing cards, and some resources are going up and down in value as you buy and sell them. You are bidding on cards to get pure points and set collection bonuses. to just a free auction, which is just great fun in itself. And then you've got these really interesting abilities to buy these buildings and invest in getting special powers that only you can have and nobody else can, such as, you know, being able to sell extra goods or having more storage capacity and all these ultra interesting powers. And I think this game did a great job of making every single building in this game unique and interesting and just a necessity to have. And I think when player powers come into a game, you need to have that you know, lucrativeness and just that lust over having that ability. And Raccoon Tycoon did that extremely well. I've had tremendous success teaching and playing Raccoon Tycoon since then to a wide array of different players. And I just think this is one of the best next level games out there, and one that I really wasn't expecting anything from, but mechanically just boiled down into beautiful, simple decisions and just ultra fun to play. That is Raccoon Tycoon at number 2. And finally, the game that surprised me the most of any game I've ever played about how good this is Citrus at number 1. Citrus is a game that I don't hear anybody talking about. This was actually recommended to me by a subscriber of the show, actually. So thank you to him for recommending it. This one is a tile placement game, as you are basically planting these little orchards, I suppose, onto the board. And every time you place a new orchard onto the board of a certain colour, you have to deploy a worker onto it as well. And you only have a limited amount of workers, so you can only have a certain amount of orchards. And there's this real tension about when you're going to start pulling people off the board or keeping them on the board, because if you have more people on the board and you start taking people off, you get fewer coins than if you have more people on your board. A bit of a strange concept, but as you play it, that little twist becomes, you understand how interesting that is and some difficult decisions that causes. But additionally, you are trying to surround these different buildings, these fincas, in order to get area majorities. And you can actually have this element of being able to spread around and link them together to maybe collect a certain, a couple of these fincas at once. And on top of all that, interesting area control, interesting tile placement, and that economy of being able to take people on and off the board, you've got this ultra interesting tile drafting mechanism where you have this kind of cross-hatching of tiles based on this grid. At the narrowest point, I think it's only 2 tiles, and at the widest point, it's 4 tiles. And you are either collecting a row or column of those tiles, paying a coin each for each tile you take. But as you take them, you're obviously sliding the whole row off, making the other rows and columns alter, so that either they become cheaper because there are fewer tiles on there, but they also change the colours that are available. Great drafting system, interesting tile placement, has a slightly abstract feel to it, where there's, the information available is pretty good at all times. You know what's available, and there's no real luck or anything in the game, but just a beautifully put together game. When I talk about being streamlined and I talk about games having nothing in this game that needs to be there, that this one has that. It's just streamlined to the core, just beautiful, clean mechanisms that are just ultra engaging. That is Citrus at number 1, a game that blew me away, and I cannot believe this game isn't as popular as it should be. Just a great surprise for me. So this concludes my top 10 pleasant surprises. I'm really happy to talk about these games because I like talking about games that not many people are talking about, games that, impressed me out of nowhere, so hopefully they can do the same for you, and it's just not the same games that, the hotness and the games that have blown up. So definitely check these ones out if they appeal to you. I really would recommend them. So that concludes this video. If you have enjoyed the video, please hit like and subscribe to my channel and check out my other videos too. For everyone else, I'll see you next time on Chairman of the Board. Bye.